Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine was never supposed to turn into a naval war. On paper, Moscow held every advantage at sea, especially thanks to the Black Sea Fleet, which by itself looked more powerful than the entire Ukrainian navy combined. Control of the water seemed like it should naturally belong to Russia. Instead, Vladimir Putin and his increasingly desperate armed forces have spent almost 4 years enduring one humiliating failure after another on the water at the hands of Ukraine, and that pattern has just continued. Convinced that distance equaled safety, Russia kept one of its most important warships in a port far beyond Ukraine's territory, assuming it was out of reach. Ukraine has just proven that assumption wrong by severely damaging that vessel and once again humiliating Putin's navy. On the 25th of November, United 24 media reported early claims that one of Ukraine's naval drones had broken through Russian defenses at Novorossiysk and landed a direct hit on a Russian warship. The strike was part of a broader coordinated attack in which Ukraine targeted several military and logistics facilities in the city. Novorossiysk, located in Krasnodar Krai, hosts one of the largest ports in the entire Black Sea basin, making it an obvious and high-value target for Ukraine. The port plays a key role in allowing Russia to export its oil and other commodities to customers around the globe, so every successful Ukrainian strike there hits both the Russian war effort and Moscow's ability to earn and move money. But this late November operation was about more than just hitting the port infrastructure again. According to the Ukrainian outlet Hromadske, the Novorossiysk strike brought together several of Ukraine's most capable special and regular forces units. The Security Service of Ukraine, the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and the Main Intelligence Directorate all collaborated on the mission. They worked side by side with Ukraine's border guards, the newly formed Unmanned Systems Forces, the Navy, and missile and artillery units to unleash a dense swarm of drones and missiles on Novorossiysk. Clearly, these groups knew something the rest of the world did not. Alongside yet another round of damage to the port, Ukrainian drones reportedly scored direct hits on a large Russian landing ship moored there, despite the port being deep inside internationally recognized Russian territory and previously considered relatively secure. That target has been identified as a Project 1171 Tapir-class landing ship, one of the largest amphibious vessels available to the Russian Navy. These ships have likely been used to shuttle troops, armored vehicles, and supplies from Novorossiysk to occupied Crimea and possibly further onward to mainland Ukraine. Tapir-class vessels are designed precisely for this purpose, to carry heavy cargo, armored vehicles, and large numbers of soldiers, then unload them directly onto a shoreline. In other words, they are exactly the kind of ship Russia needs to sustain its occupation and conduct large-scale amphibious operations. Weaponsystems.net notes that the Tapir-class was developed in the early 1960s and mass-produced between 1964 and 1975, making it yet another Soviet-era relic that Russia has dragged out of mothballs to use against Ukraine. That production timeline should be setting off alarm bells in the Kremlin. Russia has not built these ships in any meaningful numbers for roughly half a century. Every Tapir-class vessel destroyed or crippled is, in practical terms, irreplaceable. The Soviet Union originally planned to build 15 of them, but only managed to complete 14, a reminder that Russia's shipbuilding shortfalls are not a new phenomenon, but a problem that has persisted for decades. Technically, a Tapir-class landing ship has a crew of about 55 sailors, including 5 officers, and is capable of reaching a top speed of roughly 17.3 knots. Sailing at that maximum speed cuts into its range, which is about 6,300 nautical miles at 17 knots, 7,650 nautical miles at 16 knots, and an impressive 9,150 nautical miles if it cruises at a more economical 9 knots. The cargo capacity of these vessels depends on which subvariant is in question. The first batch of 6 ships can carry up to 1,000 tons of cargo, along with 313 assault troops and either 20 main battle tanks, 47 BTR armored personnel carriers, or 52 trucks. The redesigned second batch of 8 ships keeps the same limits for vehicles, but increases the troop capacity to 440 soldiers. These ships are not unarmed either. Most Tapir-class vessels mount a pair of ZIF 31B 57mm guns with about 1,200 rounds of ammunition in storage. The final 2 ships in the series swapped those guns for 4 2M3M 25mm mounts. All ships in the class carry around 24 surface-to-air missiles to provide at least some defense against air threats, and the last 8 constructed are topped off with a 40-tube A215 Grad-M rocket artillery system and about 160 rockets. For the Soviet era, this was a reasonably capable landing ship that could both deliver large forces to a coastline and defend itself to a degree. Even today, despite being outdated in many respects, the Tapir-class still represents useful amphibious capability for Russia. Ukraine clearly recognized that knocking one of these ships out of action would be a serious blow. Initially, the United 24 media report on the Novorossiysk strike came with a major caveat. The damage to the Tapir-class ship was unconfirmed. That changed the very next day, on the 26th of November, when United 24 published a follow-up piece based on fresh satellite images from the port. Those images showed that the Tapir-class vessel rumored to have been hit was in visible distress. Open-source intelligence researcher Tom Bike shared the imagery on X, highlighting a Tapir-class ship being moved within the naval base's breakwaters. He noted that the vessel was being towed by two tugboats from its usual berth to a more sheltered position inside the breakwater area, apparently for repairs. On its own, towing a ship does not prove it has been damaged. Ships are towed for all sorts of reasons. However, United 24 pointed out that the use of two tugs instead of one likely indicates stability issues, suggesting the ship may no longer be able to maneuver safely under its own power. The way the ship behaved in the water during the towing operation, according to the outlet, also implied significant damage to its hull or propulsion. Bike added that Russian naval forces routinely rotate ship positions inside ports to reduce the risk of repeat strikes, but the latest images look different. Instead of a routine reshuffle, they show a vessel clearly being repositioned into a repair zone. Ukraine and its analysts still do not know for certain whether the damaged ship is the Orsk or the Nikolai Filchenkov, the two remaining Tapir-class ships in Russia's Black Sea Fleet, but it is almost certainly one of them. Unsurprisingly, Moscow has not publicly acknowledged the incident or admitted to losing yet another major warship to Ukrainian drones. Russia's immediate response to the Novorossiysk attack was bizarre and revealing. On the 25th of November, Business Insider reported that Russian forces fired surface-to-air missiles to try to repel the drones, which in itself is a normal reaction to an aerial assault. The problem was that at least one of these missiles did not intercept a Ukrainian target. Instead, it appears to have malfunctioned and come crashing down on a residential area in Novorossiysk. Citing an anonymous Ukrainian source and video shared by the OSINT account Technical on X, the report described an 8-second clip in which a missile arcs high into the sky before curving back down and slamming into the ground only a short distance from the person filming. The impact seems to be near an apartment building, not any Ukrainian drone. As one commentator on X put it with bitter sarcasm, viewers are essentially watching a Russian surface-to-air missile intercept a Russian apartment building. In effect, Russia responded to Ukraine's devastating strike on one of its most important Black Sea ports by accidentally punching itself in the face. When you put it all together, the picture is grim for the Kremlin. Ukraine humiliated Russia by inflicting serious damage on yet another large warship in a port Russia thought was safe, then watched as Russia's own misfired missile hammered civilian infrastructure, and that Tapir-class ship was only one of several targets struck in Novorossiysk during that raid. United 24 media notes that Ukrainian forces also hit a drone manufacturing facility, an oil refinery, and the Sheskari's oil terminal. According to the outlet New Voice of Ukraine, Ukrainian missiles and drones further damaged S-300 and S-400 air defense systems guarding the area. For Ukraine, it was an exceptionally productive night. For residents of Novorossiysk, it raises uncomfortable questions about why their city is not being protected more effectively. A sarcastic answer might be that Russia is trying to protect this critical port, but that the very S-300 and S-400 systems tasked with shielding it are on fire, while a Panzer air defense system is busily throwing missiles into the sky that end up smashing into apartment blocks like some deranged architect armed with a rocket launcher. The more serious answer is that nobody outside Putin's inner circle really understands why he is not doing more to safeguard a port that is so vital to Russia's economy and global leverage. To appreciate just how significant Novorossiysk is, it helps to look beyond the immediate damage. As the New York Times explained in a 2023 profile, the Novorossiysk commercial seaport is not only one of Russia's busiest ports by cargo volume, but also one of the largest in all of Europe. It is a key hub for the export of Russian grain, oil, and numerous other products to countries around the world. Even before the illegal annexation of Crimea, Putin poured substantial resources into building up a naval base in Novorossiysk, a port that allows Russia to send ships toward Asia, South America, Europe, and Africa. Putin has previously promised leaders from several African nations that Russia would provide free grain that would almost certainly be routed through Novorossiysk. His efforts to win political influence on the African continent are undermined every time Ukraine forces the port to shut down or destroys its infrastructure. Beyond grain, the oil moved through Novorossiysk is of global significance. Marine Insight estimates that the port processes around 2.2 million barrels of oil each day, which is roughly 2% of total world oil supply flowing through this single location. That figure comes from coverage of an earlier Ukrainian strike in November that temporarily shut the port down entirely. Ukraine has repeatedly struck Novorossiysk, and the latest attack, in which a Tapir-class ship appears to have been badly damaged, demonstrates that Russia is failing to protect one of its most strategically important cities and trade gateways. This failure ties directly into a broader collapse in Russian air defenses, a shift that has transformed what was once a major Russian advantage into a far more level playing field with Ukraine. The Tapir-class ship hit at Novorossiysk is only the latest chapter in a long story of humiliation for the Russian Navy since the start of the full-scale invasion. The Kremlin once touted the Black Sea Fleet as a decisive tool that would allow Russia to dominate Ukraine's coastline, blockade its ports, and support large-scale amphibious operations. In reality, Russia's entire Black Sea strategy has turned into a fiasco. The loss of a Tapir-class landing ship merely adds another vessel to the growing list of ships that Russia has lost or crippled in a war against a country that barely has a functioning navy of its own. By August 2024, Ukraine had reportedly destroyed or disabled roughly one-third of the Black Sea Fleet using a combination of missiles and drones. That alone was a staggering turnaround. The fleet that was supposed to guarantee Russia's control of the Black Sea suddenly could not safely operate there at all. These losses not only humiliated the Russian Navy but also forced Russian commanders to confront the reality that none of their ships were safe within the theater. Flagship vessels like the cruiser Moskva were sunk or damaged so badly that they were effectively removed from combat, and more ships followed. According to the Atlantic Council, by the spring of 2024, the UK Ministry of Defence assessed that the Black Sea Fleet had been rendered functionally inactive. Politically, Putin's skill at distorting reality and manipulating domestic narratives may still be enough to maintain majority support for the war among Russian citizens. Operationally, however, the Navy has been gravely weakened, losing the ability to close off key waterways or move troops and supplies by sea with anything like the efficiency the Kremlin envisioned. The consequences of this loss of maritime dominance stretch far beyond Ukraine. In October 2024, the publication The Conversation noted that Russia's loss of control over the Black Sea had significant global implications. Without a secure Black Sea fleet capable of projecting power, Moscow's naval reach is constrained, and it increasingly has to lean on China to maintain any semblance of influence on the world's oceans. Russia is sliding into the role of junior partner to Beijing at sea. Joint naval exercises between China and Russia, such as those conducted in July 2024, are marketed as demonstrations of deepening cooperation. In reality, they highlight how far Russia has fallen and how clearly China is taking the lead while Russia follows. By April, United 24 media reported that the Black Sea Fleet's woes had grown even more severe. Many of the few remaining combat-capable ships that Putin had redeployed to ports in occupied Crimea, supposedly to place them out of range of Ukrainian drones and missiles, were no longer truly combat-ready at all. Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmytro Pletenchuk explained that Ukraine knows exactly how many such vessels Russia has left and, even more importantly, what condition they are in. Counting large warships, he pointed out, is not especially difficult. They are too big to hide. The remaining combat ships are either not ready for action or undergoing major repairs that Ukraine sometimes helps to modernize by hitting nearby facilities with airstrikes. The rest of the fleet in the region consists of auxiliary support vessels that do not pose a meaningful threat. The Tapir-class landing ship struck in Novorossiysk is part of this broader Black Sea story. It had been withdrawn all the way to Russia's own coastline rather than staying in occupied Crimea. According to United 24's reporting, this withdrawal is part of a larger pattern, with Russia pulling combat ships away from ports like Sevastopol once Ukraine demonstrated it could hit them repeatedly. Now, Ukraine has made it clear that even Novorossiysk, inside Russia's internationally recognized borders, is within reach of its drones and missiles. If Russia responds by pulling the rest of its Black Sea fleet even farther from the front, it raises a simple question. What is the point of maintaining a naval presence there at all? Ukraine appears to have reached the stage where it can pick off Russian ships at ranges that would once have allowed those ships to shape the course of the invasion. The situation is so dire that Putin cancelled Russia's annual Navy Day parade in July, reportedly out of concern that Ukrainian drones might strike the ships normally showcased in St. Petersburg and out of fear that the diminished number and quality of the remaining vessels would invite ridicule rather than respect. Freed from the need to focus solely on frontline naval threats, Ukraine has used part of 2025 to systematically target another pillar of Russia's maritime strategy, the so-called shadow fleet of tankers that Moscow uses to evade sanctions and move illicit oil and other cargoes. In July, Chuck Farrar of the Kyiv Post detailed roughly half a dozen likely Ukrainian strikes on shadow fleet ships. Some of these incidents occurred far from Russian waters, suggesting that Ukraine may have undercover assets or partners in various countries where Russian oil is traded or transshipped. Farrar writes that Putin's shadow fleet, once advertised as a symbol of Russian defiance against Western sanctions, has become a dangerous liability. Each tanker is now a potential target, and as Ukraine refines its unconventional arsenal of drones and sabotage techniques, the Kremlin faces a stark reality. No vessel is truly safe, and an invisible net is slowly closing around its maritime economy. In that context, the attack on the Tapir-class ship in Novorossiysk may simply be a case of Ukraine seizing an opportunity when one of the few remaining significant Russian warships sailed within reach again. For Putin, it is alarming proof that pulling his ships back into what he thought was safe territory does not guarantee their survival. As the gaps in Russia's air defenses grow wider and Ukraine's reach lengthens, it would not be surprising to see follow-up strikes that destroy yet more ships the Kremlin believed to be secure. While Ukrainian drones and missiles pound Russian ships and port infrastructure, other countries are also starting to signal that they are willing to prepare for the worst. Sweden, for example, has recently seen one of its officials publicly call for the country to acquire a Kremlin-killer missile capable of striking Moscow itself if Russia ever goes too far. Reports suggest that this particular missile frightens Putin even more than the prospect of NATO expansion, and there is a separate video that explains exactly why. If you found this breakdown of Russia's naval failures useful, make sure you subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the many ways in which the Russian Navy is being exposed and defeated, and thank you for watching.